Hey, what's going on, folks? I'm excited today to be joined by Rudy Rockman.
And so I asked myself deeper questions. What does it even mean to be a Jew? Because we're told today that Judaism is a religion, but in every single religion, if you don't believe in the God, deity, book, or prophet of that religion, you're not a part of it.
Described on his YouTube bio as a Jewish and Israeli rights activist that creates content to strengthen Jewish identity, combat anti-Semitism, and generate a sense of collective unity in Israel.
A Christian that doesn't believe in Jesus is not a Christian. A Muslim that doesn't believe in Muhammad is not a Muslim.
Right.
But a Jew that doesn't believe in the Torah and Hashem, although a fundamental part of our culture, is still a Jew. So I realized that Judaism is not a religion, it's an ancient civilization.
Now today we're going to have an open conversation that may lead to debate about free speech and comedy. Ye, the man formerly known as Kanye West.
Oh, you own everything. Oh, what a bad stereotype. God, I would love that
Where it comes from. In Nazi Germany,
I would love that stereotype.
Nazi
Oh, we
Germany-
own everything.
But hold up. This is where it comes from. In Nazi Germany, Jews didn't own everything. They were told that they own everything, which made everyone go and attack them and eventually kill 6 million. So
Kyrie Irving, how to stop the hate, and the word anti-Semitism itself.
being funny is a superpower. You could use it for good, you could use it for bad.
Right.
There are certain lines. You know, when Dave Chappelle came on and started making jokes about anti-Semitism and not everyone took it seriously, for me, I didn't like what Dave Chappelle said at all because he's desensitizing society.
I think in order to gain a better understanding, find common ground, and ease the racial tension that we all feel in this world, it takes open discussions like this one here. I'm excited to have Rudy join me. I ask everyone to be polite and respectful, and the show starts now. It's the Dream Rare Podcast. Welcome to the show. The way to get the news at the desk or on the road. Let's go. God is great and success in our control. The world is crazy, but we get better from obstacles. It's the Dream Rare Podcast. Welcome to the show. The way to get the news at the desk or on the road. Let's go. God is great and success in our control. The world is crazy, but we get better from obstacles. Yeah. Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to a live episode in Convo with Rudy Israel, or I don't know how you'd like to be introduced. Is that good?
Yeah, it's good.
All right, appreciate you. So, yeah.
Israel's my Hebrew name.
Okay, awesome. So I guess we'll start with this because I have a lot of topics to bring up, but you kind of, I only clipped a clip of that just for intro purposes, but one thing that kind of spurred my introduction into trying to learn more was when I saw a lot of people were identifying as a religion and then also just as an ethnic group. And I remember asking the question on Twitter a couple of years ago. I said, is Jewish ethnicity or a religion? And I got this and that, and some people called me anti-Semitic, and I was like, damn. So that kind of made me a little bit curious. But what is it in your perspective?
Sure. So I think we need to define the other words that we're applying to define Judaism first. So a lot of people consider Judaism a religion. I don't. But what is a religion in the first place? It's defined as a belief system in a God, deity, book, or prophet. So if one does not believe in the God, deity, book, or prophet of the religion, then they are no longer part of a religion. And if they're not a part of a religion and start to adopt the God, deity, book, or prophet, then they become a part of it. You as a Christian, if a Christian doesn't believe in Jesus, why are they identifying as a Christian? They're not a Christian. And if someone is an atheist or any other religion and then they accept Jesus and the New Testament, they become a Christian. So that's the same thing within Islam. If you reject the Quran and Muhammad, you're not a Muslim. Same thing within Buddhism. If you don't accept the philosophies of Buddha, you're not a Buddhist. So those are religions. It's a wandering ideology that crosses over borders and nations throughout time that one is a part of if in the moment they identify with that or not, regardless if it's true or not. Now, if you look at the Jewish people, we do have a spirituality that is definitely a fundamental part of our civilization, way of life, and culture, but it's not exclusive to that. Meaning, if an individual does not believe in the Torah or in God, they're still a Jew, not anymore and not any less. And that's not the case for actual religions. Also, we're not an ideology that crossed over to Europe and to Africa and to America. In order to preserve our identity, we created this portable suitcase impact in our spirituality, our culture, our heritage, our history, our aspirations, our connection to a land, and to our future. So does Judaism have a spiritual element to it? Yes. So I would call it an ancient civilization. And if you look at the Aztecs, the Maoris, the Mayans, the Native Americans, the Tibetans, all sorts of native indigenous populations, they also have a spirituality attached to their culture. But if an individual of that group decides to no longer believe in the spiritual element, they're still a part of that population. So I would not say that we are a religion. I would not say that we're an ethnicity. I think an ethnicity is too broad of a term. Like you can say Latino is an ethnicity, but there's many Latin groups within Latin America. You can say The Middle East is an ethnicity, but there's many different groups within the Middle East. So I would say we are an ancient civilization that at some points were called Hebrews, other points Israel, other points Jews, and this is who we are.
Is it fair to say that the religion is based off the ethnicity or the people?
I would just not even use the term religion because then it confuses people with other religions, which we are not the same. And then people usually say, well, what about you can convert to Judaism, right? And converting to Judaism is actually very different to converting to religions. You're not just accepting this belief system and going through a very quick ceremonial process like baptism or washing your ears, hands, and feet like converting to Islam. You go through years of a process of adopting an identity, history, culture, value system, traditions, and then you have to go through several tests. And the way we see it in our culture is that a convert is a Jewish soul born into a non-Jewish body that finds their way back to their collective. And so there are other native civilizations that have a process in which one can integrate and graft themselves into that native civilization. And today we call it conversion when it comes to Judaism.
Right. Yeah, I know it's more difficult to convert because it's because I think ethnicity, heritage, and thousands of years of a people is central to even the religion. Fair. So it's like not like, oh, I'm that, and like they're like, not really. Like you need to prove yourself, and also like go through like years, like you said. Well, I
Yes,
guess,
that's if they're real about it.
is it fair to say that it's understandably confusing to a lot of people that aren't aware?
Absolutely.
All right. I guess we'll go with comedy, or I let me start with this because this is my philosophy, and I think I've seen your videos, and I know we have mutual people who watch us, and I have kind of a different view on it, but you seem like a nice guy, and you are. I think that this idea of not allowing comedy, not allowing free speech, being really sensitive. I understand why historically, ethnically, etc. But it seems to do the opposite of build trust sometimes, and it seems to do the opposite of people understanding. When people are so sensitive, and also in American society, I could speak for here. There's a lot of double standards with certain Jewish groups and Black groups where people are starting to, I wouldn't say get annoyed with people, but more just annoyed with the double standards and the fact that there's so much activism jammed down our throats. But then if you disagree with it from a political or social perspective, then they'll call you a racist or an anti-Semite. So, how do you feel about that? Like what's crossing the line, and how do we really quash the hate and racial tension that's obviously kind of growing?
For sure, I didn't disagree with anything that you just said. I definitely support and believe in freedom of speech. And I think that if people are against what others say, whether it's hate speech, then there should be a freedom of reaction to the freedom of speech. And we should condition society to understand what's right and what's wrong. The same way, if we go back 70, 80 years ago, women didn't have equal rights, Black people didn't have equal rights. And although I would still say that there is racism and sexism that exists in this world, there's hatred towards all populations. You can clearly see that the population has evolved. Our generation, millennials or Gen Z, know that being against Black people or against women is something wrong, right? That was not the norm 67 years ago. That was actually contrary to the norm. So populations can evolve not necessarily by silencing others, but by talking about it and explaining and showing why things are wrong. So I have a problem when someone calls something racist or anti Semitic when they don't explain why it's racist and why it's anti Semitic. You have every right to be able to call something out, but you have to back it up and explain it for the person in front of you to understand. Because at the end of the day, everyone is trying to be a good person, at least most people, right? And if someone is crossing the lines of saying something anti Semitic, maybe they just didn't know. And if you want them to understand, it's not just by labeling them and pointing at them and making them feel bad or afraid by society, it's by explaining to them, this is why it's anti Semitic. And then if they continue to do that, then it exposes who they are.
Let's start with comedy. I hear you. And Chappelle. But first, I want to say when I grew up and I listened to comedy, I always liked edgy comedy. But the problem is, if it's not funny, if you say something very risky and it's really funny, I always thought, okay, you got away with it. But if you say something really edgy and no one laughs in the crowd, then it kind of looks bad. That was always my line of you could say whatever you want, but when people stop laughing is usually when they determined you crossed the line. Now, I thought Chappelle's monologue, I watched the whole thing after I was on a cruise. So I came back, I heard about it, I watched it. I found it super bold, super funny, and I would say super I don't know if enticing is the right word, but I enjoyed it. Would you say that that kind of crossed the line, or that he was being anti-Semitic in his monologue?
It definitely crossed the line, and I personally didn't find it funny. But before I go into maybe the specifics, can you tell me? It would be interesting for me to understand from your perspective. What did you find funny exactly? Like, what was like the punchline that you found like was going into an issue that nobody talks about with a comedic angle?
Yeah, I'll tell real quick. I'll tell you the one that stuck out to me. But I guess what I like about certain comedians, there's obviously it's just like knock knock jokes or haha. But I like when people say something of value. And Chappelle, I remember even when he talked about Trump, and he didn't like Trump, but it was basically saying, let's give this guy a chance, you know. And I thought that was pretty brave. That was years ago where he was funny. So the parts that stuck out to me was when he said, you know, it's, and this went pretty viral, if you're black, it's a gang, right? If you're Italian, it's a mob, and if you're Jewish, it's a coincidence and not to talk about it. And then I thought it was really funny how he followed it up, and he said Kanye got in so much trouble that Kyrie got in trouble. And I just think that's a really funny line. Like Kanye got in so much trouble that Kyrie got in trouble. And then the audience started laughing. So that was a part that stood out to me. That was bold and risky, but really funny.
So I guess to the first part, what I would say is, and look, I want everyone in the audience or people listening that it's important to have these dialogues and conversations and to come with real intentions of understanding. So those who are on one side or the other side of the angle, even if you disagree, it's important to have these conversations. So in terms of the Kyrie got in trouble because Kanye got in trouble, there is some truth to that, and I'll explain why. Because Kanye said what he said, which triggered so much of the Jewish community and hurt a lot of people, and I would also say spread a lot of anti-Semitic ideas that he was pushing, and maybe all their anti-Semites that didn't really want to stand up because they were afraid of reaction from society now felt emboldened by his words. However, because he triggered the community on that level, all of a sudden, anyone that would come right after and do something, whether it's anti-Semitic or close to anti-Semitic, you would get a far worse reaction than if you would have done that before Kanye said what he said. Obviously, when people are triggered, when there's an emotional moment, their heightened emotions are going to get them to react in a certain way. So there's definitely truth to that bit. In terms of the talking about if this group does it, it's that. If this group does it, it's that. But if the Jews do it, then all of a sudden it's a different standard. That's not really true. Like Jews are constantly being persecuted throughout society, and I feel a lot of people are trying to push this idea like that there's a double standard when it comes to the Jewish people, right? A lot of people are like, "Oh my God, Kanye got fired from Adidas," which, my opinion, from what I saw, he was trying to get himself fired from Adidas, and all these different brands like pulled out from him. It's like that happened. The same thing if you reverse the situation. Not too long ago in California, in LA, Donald Sterling was a Jewish billionaire who said something racist and got canceled for being racist and for saying what he said. So that situation happens across the board. And after that happened, you didn't have Jews or anybody else going and say, "Oh my God, there's double standards against our people, this and that." So the reality is that if you're going to say something against any group, there should be an equal treatment. But the way the Jewish people experience today's reality, at least in America, is if you go to places like New York City, you have 13% of the population being Jewish, and over 56% of the total hate crimes are specifically against Jews. So if you add up all the total hate crimes from things against black people, against white people, against LGBTQ plus, against straights, against whatever minority there is or group that there is, over 56% of the hate crimes in total are specifically against Jews that are a minority. And there's constantly this double standard being put against us. If you go to college campuses, the only groups that are obsessed, all of them, all the coalitions against one group, it's usually against the Israel group. So there is a double standard that we feel. And all of a sudden, when we complain about things being wrong, then we're said, "Oh, well, you can't talk about Jews. You can't talk about Jews. You can't just talk about Jews, and you shouldn't talk about Jews in the negative way. And if you do, you'll get called out." So other things that Chappelle said that for me were the most problematic, because those, I guess, were a little bit less for me. The first one is the monologue. The first entry of like saying, "I am making a statement that I'm against anti-Semitism," because he's doing two things. He's one, joking about anti-Semitism as if it's not really a big deal. And number two, it's as if you say that, then you can say whatever you want afterwards. It's not, you're I believe, a white male Christian, right? from what I've
Yeah,
seen.
yeah, I'm part Hispanic. It depends like what victim card I need. You know, if I need to be Hispanic, I'll be like really Hispanic. But mostly I'm just white. But I tan well in the sun, so you know I fit in.
Yeah, so let's say you're white, Christian, Hispanic, a mix of all those things.
Whatever you want.
And
Yeah, it's cool.
and someone is like going to say, "Well, I'm not against the white male Hispanic Christians."
Right.
And then they go and they say a bunch of stuff that's against white male Hispanic Christians. It's not because you said you're against it that then that opens the door to saying everything else. But then he says things like, it's the Jewish people blame black people for their Holocaust, and no Jew has ever said that. He's like pushing all these ideas to convince the society that anti-Semitism is not that big of a deal. It should be laughed about, and all these different things that Jews are blaming black people for things that we've never blamed black people for, and that's very dangerous. So in my opinion, he was desensitizing society from anti-Semitism, which leads to very dangerous things.
There was a lot there, so I want to go kind of piece by piece. So
Sure.
one thing with the Kyrie response was I think Kyrie has a decent social media following. He's very famous, but to be honest, I don't think his social media really pops off like that. There's a lot of athletes that say a lot, no one really pays attention that much culturally. But when people responded so aggressively against that documentary, in my view, it probably made 10,000 times as many people watch it. I never watched it because it was like $40. And to be honest, I don't really care. It's not my interest. It's not my niche, Netflix like and chill thing that I want to watch. So I didn't. But I feel like if people didn't freak out about it and they just let them post it and ignored it, I feel like it wouldn't have even gotten that much attention, where the people that claimed to kind of shut it down only kind of elevated it. And I see this, what you were talking about in New York City with hate crimes and Jews. I love Jewish people and Jewish Americans, and it's sad to me that even Beverly Hills in New York City is not safe anymore. But the weird part, in my view, and this can turn into a political conversation over like social or racial, but Jewish Americans overwhelmingly vote liberal and progressive, like Democrat. That doesn't mean everybody does, but you look at the statistics, it's like over 70% easily. And in my view, these cities are becoming less safe for Jews because they're weak on crime and they don't know how to enforce it in the cities. So the same people playing the victim saying, oh, we're victims, everybody hates us in New York, they're the ones voting for the politicians a lot of time that's making their city unsafe. And I would say that if you're Black, white, Jewish, Asian, Hispanic, one thing that unites us all in intersectionality is nobody's safe anymore in these cities. And it's not specifically, obviously there are some racial beefs between Black and Jewish in cities. It's not that bad, but there is racial tension that exists. I would say that people aren't targeting ethnicities as much as they are just recklessly going after anybody with a watch or any old vulnerable person. So I find that, as somebody that loves these people, that playing the victim too much and taking no self-accountability sometimes backfires, like in the Kyrie situation, where I think that they almost elevated that from a non-story to probably millions of people saw that documentary, and whoever made it probably made a fortune. So congrats to that guy. He cashed out for sure.
Maybe Kanye invested it and was able to make some money off it. But look, in terms of the problem with how the Jewish community reacted to the Kyrie, it's not even Kyrie's documentary. He tweeted the documentary, which I watched, is very poorly made. But the thing is that there are a lot of truths in the documentary, and a lot of people got mad when I said that. Like, the documentary literally talks about Black people being slaves. Is that not true? Were Black people not slaves? So there's a lot of things that are factual in the documentary, but there's a lot of really wrong and false things as well. And because the person that doesn't understand anti-Semitism or is first time hearing these narratives is seeing this stuff and is knowing, okay, there's true, there are Black people who are taken as slaves, there are other things that are saying the truth, and they don't know how to differentiate what's wrong. All of a sudden, you have Jews saying, oh, that's all anti-Semitic, throw that in the trash. And they're like, well, if you're going to say it's all anti-Semitic, and I know that there are things that are true in there, then I'm not going to believe you when you say anti-Semitic on things that are not true. And we're not explaining and breaking things down, which I think is a big problem in general within society. We tend to point fingers and talk about how we feel rather than explain what's really going on for the other person to maybe understand what we have, and then we can have a conversation. In terms of Jews voting a certain way, I personally don't vote in America, although I have a piece of paper that says United States of America on it, which is called a passport. I do not see myself as anything other than Jewish. And being Jewish to me is not a religion, it's a nation, it's a civilization. And so although I have a passport and I respect America and I appreciate the fact that I grew up most of my life there and what it's given to me and what I was able to give back. And I also pay taxes there. And I respect the law. I don't feel I should have the rights to dictate who will be the president of the country that is not my country. I'm not against America, but that's not my country. So I shouldn't have personally, in my opinion, where I stand, the right to vote. In terms of people voting one way or the other, I think it has a lot to do with pop culture. I think if you look at the Jewish community in America, you have about 5.4 million Jews in estimates. Some people say more, a little bit less, but you have between 60 to 80% assimilation rates. So 60 to 80% of Jews, the next generation, are no longer identifying as Jews, meaning that being Jewish is not an issue for them for the most part. So regardless of if in a generation they would vote more to the right or more to the left, they're voting more with what pop culture is pushing them to do. And being Jewish is one of the last issues that they care about.
Yeah, I understand. Do you see what I'm saying with the Kyrie documentary though? Because it's like, I understand the goal, right? When, I'm not going to say all, but when some Jewish individuals get upset, right? Or in groups like, hey, that's anti-Semitic, and they make this huge scene and they ban them for 6 days and they make them go on, I call it a Nick Cannon apology tour. Like when Nick Cannon said something about, Jewish, he sat down with a left-wing rabbi. So now anytime anybody gets canceled for that, I just call it a Nick Cannon apology tour, or Whoopi Goldberg timeout when they put her in timeout. But in general, it's like, by making such a scene over it, I feel like the opposite effect actually happened, where most of these Jewish groups would say, we don't want people to see this documentary, or we don't want people to believe everything in it, and we don't want people to be anti-Semitic. But in turn, because they make such a huge story out of it, it goes from a 24-hour Instagram story that would have faded away and probably like 1,000 people would have saw it, into a massive news story where millions of people are seeing it. And now millions of people are seeing that he's getting everything taken away from him, where then they go, well, I guess it kind of proves them right. Even like Chappelle sort of said that. So that's the point that I'm trying to get to, is even if the goal is to stop people from feeling that way, it just seems like the response from a lot of Jewish organizations and, social media watchdog groups ends up kind of having the opposite effect and making popular what they initially set out to kind of quash.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have faith in many of these Jewish organizations. They're older generation. They think very short term. They try to keep their comfort and they try to benefit themselves and compete with other Jewish organizations. And I think it's not something that I believe in. I believe in more in grassroots movements and shifting pop culture and talking about things. So I definitely agree that because we made such a big deal and didn't explain why it was problematic, that then it gets more people to say, oh, well, let me check this out. And no one is really explaining to me why it's wrong. So I don't see why I should believe it to be wrong. And then they're saying all of it is wrong, which I know there's some things that are right. So that means anything that they would say that is wrong is now invalid. So I definitely agree with that. And I think that's one of the issues that we need to have, is like when we talk about these issues, go in depth. Like with Nick Cannon, he did say some very problematic things, not out of intent, just he was being, I think, influenced by someone and was not educated on certain issues. And then the Jewish community went after him. I understand the reaction. However, when you do sit down with that rabbi, I don't know if he was left or right, but when you do sit down with that rabbi, at no point did they even address any of the issues that he brought up. Why don't you explain to him and to the public audience that heard this and saw this happening, specifically break down every single issue and explain why it's wrong? They didn't do that. And Jews tend to tell other people that say anti-Semitic things, well, you should visit a Holocaust museum. And it's like, what? Like, because you visit a Holocaust museum, all of a sudden you'll understand why you were saying what was wrong. Right. And to be honest, if you go to a true anti-Semite and you tell them, go visit a Holocaust museum, all you're doing is giving them ideas. We don't need sympathy from people. We need to explain and get respect. And I think that's a different mindset that the younger generation has than the older generation.
And I think with certain things, like when Nick Cannon in that interview, he said a lot of inflammatory things about like just all white people in general. And I believe he was grouping Jews in. And then he said some stuff about Jews. But I believe he said something along the lines that he felt that, white people, all of them were like ethnically inferior and genetically inferior. But then it was like really the Jewish part that got him in trouble. So I think a lot of, the groups like the ADL, and I'm not saying that's you, but I just happened to watch a Breakfast Club interview with him. And he was like, in order to like prove that we don't have power, like we have to quash that speech. Everyone's going to believe it. But it almost becomes a self-manifesting thing where you use influence that certain people have in media and culture to stop a conversation, to prove that you don't have the power to stop a conversation. It almost kind of does Like everybody looks at that and is like, well, I wouldn't have said it the way that he said it, but he's kind of not wrong, because they do seem like they have a lot of influence in media and society, and they wield it to really quash criticism. Um, what would you say about that?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm not at all a part of the ADL.
Right,
It's not
right.
a organization that I identify with at all. I would love to speak to the head of ADL one day to go more in depth and maybe speak to him about what we think should be done differently. But I also want to comment that there are many people who say anti-Semitic things and don't get canceled, and the media doesn't report about it. So Kanye West all of a sudden says something horrible, and everyone is up in arms. But when you have people like Roger Waters and Bella Hadid spewing anti-Semitic things and lies about the Jewish people in Israel, no one is saying anything about it. So it's like you guys will only react in the media when it seems to be something more on the right, but when it's someone saying almost exactly the same things and even sometimes more often, that's more so on the left, then they don't talk about it. So I don't think that most of media that's reacting even cares about the Jewish people. They're always trying to push an agenda to divide populations and to have us fighting against each other rather than to have conversations of who's actually profiting and who's actually benefiting from all of us fighting. Now, you also
Yeah.
said that he grouped all the Jews as white people as well. I do want to talk about this because I think it's an important point. I don't think Jews are white at all, and I don't have anything against white people or black people. And I think even the concept of a race is an invention made by society to divide populations. However, what it means to be white is not just having light skin. You have Asians that have much paler skin than some people in Europe, and they're not considered white. So being white is really having an origin and a status, meaning originating from Europe and having a status of being considered as a person that's white within white society. If you look at Jewish people, you have Jews that come in all colors and that have many different experiences. My grandparents on my mother's side, for example, born in Morocco and Algeria, were Sephardic Jews. There's Mizrahi Jews that were in Yemen and in Iran and in Iraq and in Syria and in Lebanon and in Egypt and in all sorts of different places. So there's not only Ashkenazi Jews, which most Jews in America are Ashkenazi Jews. That's why most Americans think that that's what a typical Jew looks like when they think about that. But in Israel, Ashkenazi Jews are actually, I think, less than 50%, so less than the other groups of Jews. Now, when it comes to being Jewish, right? Our origins are not from Europe, even though some had an experience in Europe. And the way we're treated within white society is never as white. You look in Nazi Germany, we were exterminated for not being white. You look in today's society, you go to neo-Nazis, usually they'll tell you enemy number one is white. So are there some Jews that are sometimes white passing in situations? Yes, but Jewish people are not originally from Europe, nor do we have white status within white societies.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that, because that's something also I kind of noticed in the last couple of years, and I think that's something that's gotten a lot of backlash from certain Jewish journalists, where they're a lot less honest than you. You came out and you're like, this, my identity matters to me, and that's see, all I ask for is honesty. Even for Black groups, if their race doesn't matter to them, I don't care. But if it does, I also don't care. I'm not going to call them a racist. Like I can't tell you who you are and what group you're a part of. So I just love the honesty of it. But I've noticed that a lot of Jewish journalists, they'll be like, I'm white, I'm bad, I'm white, I'm bad, I'm white, I'm bad. And then when you say they're white, they say, I'm not white, I'm Jewish. So it almost feels like a sabotage on white people or other people, where they're identifying as white just to bash at themselves. But then when you say that they're white, they'll be like, no, I'm not white. So it's kind of like the deceptiveness of like identifying as something just to hate on it and push it down. But then when push comes to shove, you turn and be like, no, 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 I'm totally different. That type of like deceiving mentality is a lot less honest than yours.
Yeah, I don't know if I've ever come across someone who identifies as white, bashes being white, and then says that they're not white. But I do think that there are a lot of Jews that identify as white and also bash people that are white. And I don't think there's anything wrong with someone's skin color just because it's lighter than someone who has darker skin color. I mean, do we need to create race based on eye color and hair texture and size? Like this whole division based on what we look like is ridiculous. There is an experience today, unfortunately, because there is such a thing called racism, that when you are Black or looking different than what the norm within society is, let's say in America, that sometimes you will experience racism, and we can call that out. But there's no inferiority or superiority based on someone being one skin color or the next. And I'm always going to be honest, I can't answer for other people.
Right. Yeah, I've seen that. Obviously, it's not everyone. And I have friends that like, I'm not the type that blames them for that person. Like, that's not true. But I do see that in the media. I mean, I have screenshots of at least like 6 people doing that. It's unfortunate. I guess this is a question because you said that, you don't see yourself as white, you're Jewish. People use the word white supremacy a lot. Like, we need to destroy white supremacy. White supremacy is an issue. I mean, obviously you've heard it. Anybody alive has heard that in some sort of form. Would it be fair for someone that was white or someone of another race to say, Jewish supremacy is a huge problem and we need to do something about Jewish supremacy, or would that be considered anti-Semitic?
Well, I mean, the reason why people would say it's anti-Semitic is because it goes onto a trope of saying that Jews are trying to control the world and think that they're better than other people. And that's not anything common within the Jewish people. We don't think that we're better. We're proud of being different, as anyone should be. We're all different organs within one body, and we have to stop pretending to be, if the heart is the heart, don't pretend to be the brain, and be okay with the brain being different. And also understand that we're all equal and we're all a part of one. We all need each other in order to function. So the problem with saying Jewish supremacy is it's not a real thing, and it's been used in the past to try to convince populations that those Jews, that group over there, is attacking you or is taking from you, and they're the source of the problem. So that's why it would be seen as anti-Semitic. But if you do find an individual Jew that thinks that being Jewish is better than others, or that they are somehow genetically built different, or whatever it is within being supremacist, then let's all condemn that person as an individual. But that's not a real thing within Jewish culture. As a Jew, I'm speaking about that. I would be against it if it exists, and I don't see it existing.
Right. I guess a question is too, because I'm personally, I'm myself. So when I see Ye or other people talk, I mean, I have my own thoughts, my own opinions. So I'm not going to latch on to what they're saying, because I've known things for years and have my way of saying it that I think comes off better and more authentic. But not to bash what he's, you get what I'm saying. I'm not going to latch on to that. But what I will say is I noticed that the argument that I heard you say, Lex Friedman and Tim Pool, they say, don't talk about the group, talk about the individual. While I agree that you shouldn't say every single person of this thing is doing this, that's messed up regardless of who it is. But at the same time, when the World Jewish Congress comes together to try to take Ye's music off of, streaming services, they're not doing it as individuals. They're doing it as a Jewish organization. That doesn't mean it's your fault, but that's what they're identifying as. The ADL identifies as a Jewish organization. There's thousands of groups that identify as Jewish groups. So would it not be fair at a certain point to say that the Jewish groups are doing that? Not all of them, but I don't understand where everybody wants to come together for a victim card, come together for a unity and a people. But when there's any sort of criticism or accountability, then all of a sudden it seems like everybody scatters and said, we have no group, we're just individuals. How come the energy's not kept when, I don't see that as that there is some sort of cohesive group in certain categories.
Yeah, so first of all, you could understand why if someone said something against you, that you would probably not want to listen to their music or do business and associate with them. So, it's normal that maybe Jews would not want to listen to Kanye West's music. I don't think that their music should be banned. I'm against canceling people. I have Yeezys, for example, and I'm not wearing them anymore because I'm very offended and hurt by what Kanye said, but I'm also not burning them because I hope that he can do something called tshuva, which is a Jewish concept of fixing and healing the situation and bringing more truth to it in order to correct what you broke. In terms of Jewish organizations, we have to understand that a Jewish organization isn't an organization for Jews. It's an organization of Jews that happens to be Jewish. So if there's the ADL, the people who are part of the ADL have a certain ideology and they happen to be Jewish, but they don't represent the Jewish people. So we have to differentiate and not group all of us together, because let's say me and you, we would probably agree on a lot of things. And then you pull up a Jewish organization that would say something that we would both disagree with. And then you say, oh, well, these are what Jews believe. And it's like, hello, do people not matter? I don't stand for those people. So the only real Jewish organization that exists that groups us all is being Jewish, period. Then other organizations have certain political agendas, certain objectives, and we can talk about those things, but we should definitely not use that to then blame all the Jewish people. Also, what has been happening a lot is looking into Hollywood and media and saying, oh, look, this company is owned by a Jew, that company is owned by a Jew, this record label is owned by a Jew, and these people, let's say, are doing bad things. So it's clear that Jewish people are doing those bad things. Well, if you look at most of the Jews that are in those positions that are usually doing bad things, which does exist, and we can talk about it and be specific about it as well in order for us to address the source of the problem, most of the times they don't even care about being Jewish in the first place. They don't usually even marry Jewish wives or husbands. They don't have really Jewish kids. They don't practice Judaism. They definitely don't do anything to benefit the collective or take actions to help the Jewish people. So if their actions are their own actions for their own selfish agenda, and they just so happen to have been born Jewish, I don't think we need to use their ancestry as a tool to then justify what they're doing and then box in other people like myself that have nothing to do with that, but would stand up and fight against the things that are wrong that are being done.
Right. I guess this is how a lot of people see it, where, on one hand, everybody's individuals. There's 20 different types of Christian churches, and there's a hardline one that wouldn't agree with the, BLM abortion church. This is true to anybody. Why would Jewish be different? I understand that everyone's not responsible for everything. But I think what you said in the Jewish community, that the only really group that unites you is being Jewish yourself. So there is that kind of cohesiveness of like, this is us. But it seems like, say, obviously I understand, like, I think the Yay DeathCon tweet was, that wasn't going to ever gain sympathy. If someone did that DeathCon versus black people would be upset too. I understand. But I guess the point is there, Ye made a decent point of, you have all these record executives, a lot of the big one, if not all of them, that own the major corporations that own everything. I mean, it's largely Jewish. Doesn't mean it's everyone's fault, but that's just statistically true. And they're pushing all this music and profiting off this music that has black people killing each other, black people selling drugs, white people and Jewish kids overdosing on pills. Like, rap culture, as a hip hop artist myself, has become extremely toxic. So my question is, if there are Jews at the top that are not acting properly and are not responsible or not representative of the whole group, how come so many Jewish organizations and Jewish individuals are way quicker to try to drop Ye for his music, but seem to have very little energy to try to hold those wicked ones accountable for the evil that they're doing in the world? There doesn't seem to be very, very much interest in stopping them from pretty much getting kids and black people to kill themselves.
Yeah, so to the last part that I'll address first, I think it's a valid question. Like, if Jews care about calling things out, why aren't they calling out things that are wrong? And I do think that they call out the Madoffs and the Epsteins and the, all these individuals that, the whole entire Jewish community condemns their actions and does not see anything that they do as a part of them. However, what you're talking about in terms of pushing curse words and horrible messages to the youth through music, which is such a powerful tool to change a person's mind and to especially mold someone who's so young, a lot of those things are negative. I don't think it's the Jewish people that created that. I think it's those who run certain societies and have interests that want that to be created in order for us to not rise above and to fight each other. I mean, you even look in the education system, it's all about creating employees, that don't learn about the topic, just
Right.
like do this test and memorize this stuff that you're going to forget in order to produce, not to create, to do what they want instead of like learning and being financially independent and mentally and psychologically independent. But I just want to say something. Not only are Jews very disproportionately high within the businesses of music, but they're also disproportionately high in mathematics, in science, in medicine, in humanitarian organizations. So, you can't just take the one field that I don't think it's the Jews that make that field wrong. I think it's the society that we're living in and those that are profiting from it that has forced that field to go wrong. And then certain people are, don't have a backbone or don't care about their own identity and just, succumb to doing what benefits them. It's kind of like, don't hate the player, hate the game. And if you hate the game, change the game. And if you look at other Jews in other fields, you have many Jews that are very good in other fields that are not trying to push anything wrong. So that's the conversation I think we should have.
Right. I guess the point that I'm making is not to blame everyone else, or not that Jews don't do great things. I mean, there's actually, you probably know if you follow sports, there's an Israeli in the NBA now, one of the first Israelis. Yeah, exactly. So I thought that was pretty cool that he's, breaking norms there. So it's not to blame other people and saying no one's doing something great, but it's more like, I would say probably hundreds, if not thousands of Jewish organizations crack down on Kyrie and Ye. But do you know a single Jewish organization that has told Jewish record executives to stop making music about pill popping and gang violence when our country is, millions of people are dying every year from pills and gang violence? Like, is there even one that tries to hold their own group accountable? I don't know a single one. The World Jewish Congress, the ADL, nobody.
I think just like we need to separate the two. Like, condemning Kyrie for posting a documentary that has a lot of lies and anti-Semitic things with the platform that you have is okay. If someone posted a documentary against any groups, they should be condemned for it. I don't think he should have been treated the way he was treated. I don't think that the conversation should have went the way that it went. And then we can separate that and say, well, there are other issues that maybe the Jewish community is blind to. And because there's so many Jews that not directly or intentionally, but somehow within play a role in pushing these other negative things, then Jewish people that don't even know about this problem, let's communicate with those Jews so that they can respond and put pressure on their own population that are doing things that are not Jewish at all and try to correct that. I mean, you believe in God, I see God bless, so do I. And you clearly believe in the Old and New Testament. I believe in the Old Testament and in the Oral Torah and everything else. The music that we're hearing is completely against anything Jewish. It's completely against anything moral because it's pushing for, hate and for killing and for drugs and for, just forgetting the values that humanity should have. So, yeah, I do think that Jews should condemn those things even more. But maybe it's not because they're seeing it as a problem and not condemning it. Maybe it's because they don't see it as a problem. And in that way, we should be communicating to them why it's a problem rather than telling them don't condemn other real problems that do exist.
Yeah, no, I mean, definitely there's a, doesn't seem like it's a priority and just something to raise awareness to. On another hand, this is my thought with you, because I want to get back to the white supremacy, Jewish supremacy thing, where your people, you're right, that's all cool with me, whether black people do it, Jewish people do it. I think that's fine. Individuals, I treat everybody as an individual. I have Jewish friends, Muslim friends, Christian friends, but there's no doubt if, say, an entire city, if overnight New York, there was no white or Jewish or black people there and everybody was Muslim, the entire culture would shift, right? So at the same time as we should love individuals and treat people for who they are, there's no doubt that groups do exist and, patterns do exist. And if Jews took over Iran or Iran took over Israel, I'm not saying what happened, but like the culture would shift pretty quickly because there's competing ideologies of how to run society, Sharia law versus, Israel. So this is my balance of like, I'm not a hateful person and I don't like blame people for what, but I also don't not see anything. I understand that Christians mostly do want to outlaw abortion, and it's not because they're individuals, it's because they're Christian. They think it's against the Bible. Some don't, but a lot do. On that note, with Jewish supremacy, you said you don't see it as an issue. You don't think it's really there. And if you did, you would call it out. Do you think there's a white supremacy, and do white people have the right to feel like there's not, or would that make them racist in your view?
I just think that we need to have a conversation of not grouping everyone into one. Does it exist a reality that some white people think that they're superior and others are inferior? Yes. Has that historically played out into colonization and taking people and exterminations, including of my people? Yes. I mean, the reason why Jews were killed in the Holocaust is because they said white people are superior and Jews are the most inferior population, vermin that has to be exterminated. That's a real thing. But that doesn't mean that all white people are racist. That doesn't mean that all white people subscribe to this. I would say most white people are probably not, and most white people don't believe in those things. So it's like a problem when we don't go into the specifics, because then it gets people to feel offended. And then rather than bringing truth to the conversation, we're using truth to weaponize against each other and to divide. So does it exist? Yes. Is it like the main thing that all white people believe in? Absolutely not. So we just need to be more upfront and specific about it.
Yeah, and if it exists, and there are some white people that do believe that they're superior, right? But most don't, but some do. Is it fair to say that some Jews feel that they're genetically or ethnically superior, and that Jewish supremacy also exists, but in a small form like white supremacy?
Would you be able to find Jews that think that they're better? Yes.
Oh, for sure. I could find 30
yes.
of them. Yeah.
I don't think you can take any group and not find someone within that group that doesn't think that they're superior. However, it's not something that changes culture within Jewish people. It's not something that dictates actions. It's not something that has real world impact, unlike white supremacy, which has. And it's fine to condemn it, because if, let's say, one is white and isn't a part of it, they can condemn that without feeling offended. I think the offense comes when others that are trying to condemn that are then condemning others, let's say like you or others, that don't have white supremacy and wouldn't support it and would fight against it. So I think it's just in the way that we're communicating things, we need to be very direct and not just group things all together.
Yeah, I'm not offended by I'm not going to say anything, but I'm not offended by people condemning this or that. What I am, I guess, aware of is the double standards of if there are some Jewish people or some white people that exist that think that they're superior, and that means that there is white supremacy somewhere, no matter how small it is. I don't understand why there also wouldn't be Jewish supremacy. And when a lot of people that, have powerful positions are Jewish and there are powerful white people that have positions, why is it okay for society to condemn white supremacy, but if you were to condemn Jewish supremacy, you'd probably get called anti-Semitic? That I just don't
Because
understand why one exists and one doesn't exist.
because there's a difference between one individual or few individuals having an opinion and something being like a big part of a certain culture historically or in the present that has real world implications. So if you find me one person that's white and that's thinking that they are superior to others, that doesn't mean there's white supremacy. But if we talk about the specific things that this concept as a greater concept has done to societies, then that's what we can talk about. So when I guess here Jewish supremacy, I don't hear you're condemning the individuals that may be wrong, that me and you would agree and go and condemn them together. I hear it as you're putting on this idea that exists within the mainstream of the Jewish culture, or at least a part of Jewish culture, that there's this real world implications supremacy movement of Jews. And that does not exist like it does exist or it has exist within white society.
Yeah, you're saying like white supremacy has existed in history and Jewish supremacy hasn't, or sort of like that type of organization. Says who? I mean, I think that has happened in history. Where I don't look at it to tell you my point of view. I don't look at it as like, oh, they're bad or that. I just think of it as, because like similar to how you're thinking of, we are a specific people with a lot of pride and self-love, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I think historically, two things have happened to Jewish people. Is one, they have been, before Israel was, claimed or reclaimed in the 1900s, everybody's kind of scattered, right? And that's difficult when you're living in countries, whether it's Germany, America, Ireland, wherever you are, and you're the minority, right? And you're in a group, especially in the 1900s, when everybody was like racially proud, right? The pride in the Italian community, in the Irish community, in the English community. There was a sense of racial division in the 1900s more than now, no question. And I think, because Jewish people have always had their own distinct identity, when they go to certain countries, they don't always assimilate in the way that certain cultures, whether it be Catholics or Christians or Muslims in history, they don't always assimilate exactly as much as other cultures want to. And it's created friction. And I'm not saying that it's right or wrong. I'm just saying like this idea that white supremacy exists because white people have done bad things in history, but Jewish people are the innocent victims of history and they've never done anything, like that's only in your head. And I don't think that's real history, in my opinion. I think there's been mistakes in the white Anglo-Saxon community, and there's been plenty of wickedness in the Jewish world as well.
So there's a few things to break down. First of all, would you say there's such a thing as Latino supremacy, Native American supremacy, or Tibetan supremacy?
If you want to know my truth, I don't use the words racist, sexist, like supremacy. If a Jew says I love my people, I think I'm better, I wouldn't even call them a Jewish supremacist. I'm just like, that's your opinion, and I don't know if you really believe that or not, or it's like a cope, but I don't, whether it's black, all I ask for is no double standards. So if a black person says I think I'm better and I think black people are better, I wouldn't even call them a supremacist. So I don't use like with all of that. I just think that in this society, the only people that aren't allowed to feel that way are white people, and everyone else are allowed to have pride and groups and organizations that benefit their racial interests. And white people are deemed supremacists and racist if they do that. But me personally, I'm so mixed up. I don't really, I have like 4 different ethnicities in me, so I don't have like that much like, yeah, I'm Polish, or it doesn't mean much to me. But yeah, I wouldn't say any of those exist to me.
Yeah, so you're not speaking to someone who's anti-white, so that's the good thing.
Yeah, I don't, and if you were, I'm not saying you are. it doesn't even bother me. I guess to me, it's just like
you want people to be honest. I get it.
Yeah.
The point of why I asked you the question of why Latino supremacy, Native American supremacy, like those things don't exist. Does that mean that you won't find a Latino person that says Latinos are the best? or Native American person that wouldn't say Native Americans are born superior. Like, you will find individual groups like that everywhere, but it's not a thing that impacts society and that has power to really push for negative things on a large scale. And, I can point you to many things of white supremacy that historically has done things such as the Holocaust, such as colonization, of believing that one group is superior and other groups are inferior. So I get to take their resources and their lands and to create wars and so on. That's a real thing. And I think that the specifics of those things, you would probably be against that. You'd be against the colonization. You'd be against the Holocaust of killing people. But that has real world implications and real actions. Whereas if you find me some Jews that have some opinions that we would both be against, that's not something that has ever had real world implications compared to white supremacy. So I think it's very dangerous to then go and attach and say in the same sentence, well, there's Jewish supremacy just like white supremacy. No, there isn't. And if there is, then let's talk about the specifics and break it down. And the last thing that you said is about assimilating, that I just want to point out to, and then I want to hear your response to that. We can continue. Is about like, oh, well, Jews are not assimilating, so they're being rejected. But if you look in, let's say, Miami, I lived from age 5 to 17 in Miami. And I would say it's the least American city in America, where no one is really identifying as American. You're Argentinian, Venezuelan, Colombian, Haitian, Jamaican, Puerto Rican, Dominican, Cuban. Everyone's from somewhere else. And a lot of people, even if they're first, second, third generation born in America, still identify as being from those places. And no one is going, oh, you're not assimilating. We hate you. You're a problem. If you look at the demographics that are immigrants within the United States that are the most successful right now, it's Nigerians, Koreans, and Indians. And no one's going after those groups and saying, oh, you guys are so successful and you guys are immigrants. So, are there people that are against immigrants or people who identify as differently? Yes, but there is an additional double standard held against the Jewish people when we choose not to assimilate. And the Jews that do want to assimilate eventually get taught that they shouldn't have because they're not German. Clearly, if they were German, then their German passports wouldn't burn with them as they were being cremated just for being Jewish. We're not Moroccan. My family was living in Ujda, and there was a massacre of the Jewish community in 1948 as a response and retaliation to the creation of Israel. How are we Moroccan? How are we Polish? How are we German? And I think that Jews should have an equal status within all societies that they're living in, as long as they're productive and respectful of the law. And that's actually part of our culture, to spread light wherever we are. However, I think that Jews need to be understanding that the status that we have in other places is usually temporary, and that the origins of where we come from is from Israel. Like, this is our people and who we are in our family, and anywhere else is an experience that's temporary.
Yeah, so with the first part that you were saying was basically white supremacy is real because white people have committed genocides in history. Is your understanding of history that Jews have never killed millions of people, or Jews have never done anything wicked and committed mass atrocities?
Do you have an example of Jews killing millions of people or colonizing other populations and going to foreign lands and taking it from them?
I mean, some would say the current state of Israel is that, most
The state of Israel's decolonization is Jews coming back to their ancient civilization. If the Tibetans are able to go back to Tibet, that wouldn't be colonization. If Native Americans are able to have access to their lands, that wouldn't be colonization. That's decolonization. And unfortunately, the British did exactly what they did to all other societies that they colonized under the guise of white supremacy, that they are superior than others, so they get to take from others. And they divided and conquered. They did that between India, Pakistan. They did that in Afghanistan. They did that in Nigeria. And they did it between Israelis and Palestinians, convincing the Jews that the Arabs and Palestinians were their enemies by appointing the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, Hajj Amin al-Husseini, who met with Hitler and was a horrible individual, and appointed him as the leader of the Palestinians for Jews to experience Palestinians as all with this guy. And then they did something called the Balfour Declaration, stating that they had the intention of giving a state to the Jewish people in this land, which at the time they didn't even have control of. And when they did have control of, they were not letting even Jews pour in. So they never had the intention of allowing Jews to come back. They had the intention of giving the experience to the Arab world, that idea of Zionism and Jews coming back to the land is an extension of European colonialism. Right. And in terms of genocide,
yeah, I'm not saying that is colonization. I would just say a lot of people view it as that. And I know the Balfour Declaration, Balfour gave it to Lord Rothschild. What I wanted to say,
he wrote a paragraph on a paper. He didn't actually give anything.
Well, yeah, I mean, it worked out,
because we kicked out the British. We literally terrorized the British until they left. That's how they left. They never would have left if we hadn't done that.
But as far as atrocities, I mean, I wouldn't sit and say that, just like in general, my family came from Poland. My family came from Italy. They were not they didn't sail over on the Nina, the Pinta, the Santa Maria. They didn't, in many cases they fought in World War II on the side of Germany, but they're now getting blamed for Germany. But I would say that there was Jewish influence in the Bolshevik Revolution, the Holodomor, a lot of communist ideology. I'm not saying every Jewish person was in on it, but you have to understand at the times, just like Hitler and Stalin, and there was all this nationalism and all this like, self-love, and like everybody thought that they were better than everyone else. I mean, you can pretend like it's not true, but of course, Jewish people also feel that way. And a lot of times they view, non-Jewish Europeans as lesser, through their lens. And I think that they've committed atrocities to Europeans under the guise of, on the same scale as, I don't know on the same scale, but on a scale of similar sort of ideology,
So,
not caring about other groups because of their ethnicity.
in terms of scaling, you brought up the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Let's just say Israeli-Arab conflict, because there's been wars with other Arab countries besides just the Palestinians, with Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan. In fact, there were 3 wars in 1948, 67, and 73. If you add up all the casualties on the Jewish and Arab side, including Palestinians, including Jews, including all sides from war, you get less than 100,000 in the past 100 years. So consequences of war that we were forced to fight in because European forces put us into that position in the first place is not compared to 6 million people being systemically exterminated for their identity. And I think it's very dangerous to make the comparison. In terms of were there Jews in the Bolshevik Revolution?
Real quick,
yeah.
I think it's dangerous to sit here and say that there's Jews have never done anything in history. I mean,
I'm not saying we're not doing anything. I'm saying I'm saying if you want to bring something up and to compare it and to contrast it, then bring it up. And if you're going to bring up something that I agree with, I'll agree with you. But if you're going to bring up something that has no connection at all, I'm going to call it out. And
well,
to compare,
what about Stalin killed more people than Hitler? And what if I think there was Jewish influence in his regime? He's not Jewish.
Okay, this is something I want to break down. Like, you'll find many different groups within Stalin's regime, but why are you specifically pointing out to the Jews that were in his regime? And one of the things that's problematic with anti-Semitism that other groups don't face is literally every extremes blame us for being the opposite extreme.
Well, I'm not German, so why are you blaming me for Germany?
I'm not saying you. I'm not blaming you at all for Germany. Okay. I'm just explaining to you the experience of Jewish people is that if you look at those who are communist, they called the Jews the capitalist. If you look at the capitalist, they called the Jews the communist. You look at the white supremacists, like neo-Nazis, which I would, assume that you would agree do exist. They think the Jew is enemy number one. You look at the black people who are more extreme, like the Farrakhan's, they would say the Jew is enemy number one. You look at the far left, they hate the Jews in Israel. You look at the far right, they hate the Jews in Israel. And so what we experience is that literally everyone's extreme experience is always somehow pinned or connecting Jews to being the source of the problem. And that's a huge issue. So were there people that were part of the Bolshevik Revolution? Yes. Should those people be condemned for whatever way if you have a position? Yes. But to group all Jews as this is a part of the society, and you also have to understand that Jews were historically persecuted in Soviet Union and in Russia and in Ukraine and all these lands, that if they were a part of a movement that's the revolution and going against the norm for what they were being killed, maybe in the moment they didn't really know what they were getting along. They just wanted something different that would mean they wouldn't get pogroms, raped and pillaged constantly just for being Jewish. But that doesn't take away from Jews being involved with bad movements that should be called out for being involved by movements like any other individual. But to group them as this is the Jewish people, that's when it becomes problematic.
I watched a rabbi one time. He was a Talmudic rabbi on YouTube. They took down his video because it was like really edgy, and he was talking about World War II, which is a subject is very obviously touchy. But he's a Talmudic rabbi. I mean, this guy's real deal. He was basically sounding an alarm of self-accountability and self-awareness. And just like you were saying, throughout history, there's been persecution, right? There's been atrocities. The whole world's against this type of ideology, which like I was saying, I was being kind of sympathetic, where if you're a minority in a different country, especially 200 years ago, like times have changed, it's not easy. You know what I'm saying? It's a very and I get why people would be defensive, because I mean, how could you not be? You have to be to survive. So I get that completely. But basically, this rabbi was sounding an alarm that you very rarely hear, which was kind of taking not accountability for what happened, because he obviously thinks it was evil and terrible, of course, especially as a Talmudic Jew. But he was basically saying, hey, we do need to wisen up in what we're doing and what we do in societies, because we can't do these certain things, it wouldn't be wise as us, just like in any community. I think in the Black community, as much as there's rap music talking about this and that, it would be very wise for certain leaders to come together and say, hey, we got to stop killing each other in the streets, because yes, there's Jews and white people, etc., but we're also hurting each other, right? This idea of self-accountability and self-awareness, and same with white people. I don't think white people should play the victim and say it's this and that. I think white people need to step their game up and have self-accountability and self-awareness as well. But what do you think about that throughout history? While I'm obviously not making excuses for evils and atrocities that were committed, but at what point does the Jewish community come together and, maybe consider that, something that they're doing is maybe not right? Like, for just in my personal worldview of being alive right now, it's like, you can't say that, the banking industry is dominated by Jewish people. People get mad, although I think there's historical reasons for that, and that make actual sense. You can't say this, you can't say that. They could talk about your supremacy, but you can't talk about theirs. It doesn't exist. Like, it's these games of double standards, while simultaneously having a lot of power, while simultaneously saying that they don't have power, while simultaneously telling other people that they can't talk about it. That creates a lot of tension, unnecessary tension. So, like, does self-awareness and self-accountability like play a role after thousands of years of, persecution?
Yeah, so a lot to touch on. First of all, I'm not sure what a Talmudic Jew is. The Talmud is a central text within Judaism that has debates of different rabbis talking about different things, showing that there's a variety of different opinions. So every religious rabbi believes in the Talmud. There's not really this term called Talmudic rabbi. I can't speak specifically on what this guy said that you're referring to, because I don't know. And if he said things that I would agree with, I would agree. If he said things that I disagree, I disagree.
Right.
Do I think that there's victim Olympics happening and people trying to stay as victims? Absolutely. And that's also a problem within the Jewish community. I made a statement, maybe like 8 months ago or something like that, that I got a lot of pushback from the Jewish community. And I said that Jews had a responsibility to prevent the Holocaust from happening. The same way we say today, never again, right? It's taking a responsibility to make sure it never happens again. That didn't start post the Holocaust, and Holocaust wasn't the first time we were persecuted. And a lot of people were saying, oh, you're blaming the victim. And I'm saying, no, I'm not. If you are living in a house with your kids in that house, and there's been a group of people that have attacked your house and your kids in the past, and they're telling you that they're going to attack your house and your kids, you have a responsibility to do everything in your power to prevent that from happening. Securing your house, making sure that those people are caught, getting them before they get you, or at the very least leave to make sure that doesn't happen. And if you know that it's coming and you do nothing about it, or barely anything about it, or if you do something it's way too late, way too small, and you're just like fighting each other and making excuses, then it's not you that did that, but you had a responsibility to protect it. So I think a lot of people that have been victims for so long are still living as victims. And to some victims, victim empowerment to no longer be victims sounds like victim blaming. So I do think that it exists with many victimized populations. In terms of, you made a statement of like the banks are dominated by Jewish people. The problem with that statement is, I think what you're trying to say is that there's a lot of Jews that are in the banking system, and there's mostly Jews that are in many of these different banks. And then you say, well, historically, it's because of like interest being charged, and Christians couldn't charge interest, so Jews created banks, and they had Jews and all that stuff. However, the way I hear it and the way Jews hear it is, you're saying us dominate the banking system, because you're saying dominated by Jewish people. I'm Jewish people, and they just happen to be Jews as well. My collective is not dominating the banking system. Individuals that, again, themselves usually don't connect or care anything about the collective that you're grouping us all in, or just so happen to be in those systems that you can call out, but I'm not part of that group. And when you're saying that, it makes me feel like you're saying the bad things over there that I would probably agree with you on is me. And that's where the communication issue is. It might not be what you mean, but that's how it comes off of. And those historic ways of saying those things of like the Jews run the banks, the Jews run the media, the Jews run the economy, the Jews take all of your jobs, is eventually what leads certain individuals that may have different intentions than you to then manipulate that and to convince society that we need to exterminate the rest of the Jewish people. And that's why it's dangerous and triggering for us.
Understood. Yeah, no, it wasn't even a criticism. It was more like a compliment, where I think historically, I mean, I think you would somewhat agree that there is historical reasons that a lot of, top bankers are Jewish, not all of them, but I guess it's like, this is the part that kind of confuses me as somebody that loves people and doesn't want anything like that terrible to ever happen. it's like, it's happening, but don't talk about it because it might turn into this thing. Like, it's like such a lack of accountability that it makes people like feel weird about it. And it ends up, in my opinion, causing more problems where, yeah, I understand you don't own a bank. Like, one of my best friends is Jewish. Like, I wish he owned a bank. We'd go on a lot more vacations and stuff. But,
More cruises.
and one of my friends is Jewish. And to be honest, he's very good with money. And that's my friend that I hit up. He's good with real estate, and he's very selfless, and he'll share info, and just like one of the like really like most helpful people that I've had in the last couple of years. But in general, I guess it's like I understand why people don't want that narrative to kind of go out there, but at what point does it just become almost like covering up the truth because the truth might be perceived as a certain way? And like because I don't, I don't.
It's finding the balance. Like, you can't, like, what if you're saying that there's historic reasons for why Jews were the ones who started opening banks because they couldn't participate in agrarianism or own land and participate into what was back in the day the economy, and that you had Jews all over because we were displaced everywhere and Christians couldn't hold interest from other Christians. So banks were created. That's fine. That's not anti-Semitic. If you're going to say there are many individuals within the banking system that are Jewish themselves and that I have a problem with this banking system or that banking system, that's not anti-Semitic. When you say that the banking system or the media is dominated by Jewish people, you're not specifying that those individuals are there and happen to also be Jewish, as there are many also non-Jews.
Right.
It's making it, even if without your intention, the way we're perceiving it, as you're grouping all Jewish people. And I think that's where the miscommunication happens, which I'm not saying we shouldn't talk about truth. Talk about anything you want to bring up to the table. Let's bring it up. I'm always open to talk about anything. I don't care. But I just want there to be an understanding from both sides that if this is what they mean, they're not attacking you, but also understand why they feel attacked. So maybe we can change our language to be more open about these things rather than just speaking past each other.
Right. And with what you're saying, I guess this is the disconnect. And then I want to get to things in America with like Israel and America, that because I'm not a hateful person, but I want to talk about just certain things that are going on that I think we're going to see eye to eye on, actually. But in general, I guess every Black person isn't a Black activist, right? Some people are like, I like anime, I don't even care what my race is, right? But then there's other people that say Black power, we Black, like we was kings, like, or there's Black Hebrew Israelites that probably yell at you and me when we walk in New York City, from the street. But in general, I'm not going to put someone in a group based on if you are Black and you don't even care about your race. I'm not ever going to blame you for anything. But the thing that I see with a lot of Jewish people, not all of them, obviously, but including yourself, to be honest, where it's like, if you were some of this person where you're like, I'm an individual, I'm Rudy, like you're an Israel rights activist, right? A Jewish rights activist. You care about your people. You care about your identity. I think that's great. I would never call you racist for that. I think that's like, if that's your journey and that's your life purpose, who am I to tell you that it's not, right?
If you love your family, doesn't mean you hate your neighbor.
1,000% agree. But this is the thing, is like, if it's always just an individual, how come everybody comes together and says, well, we remember this bad part in history, all of us together? It almost feels like everybody comes together to reflect on the evils of history. Everyone comes together for special victim cards, and everybody's a group. And then as soon as there's like a slight criticism of the group, everybody scatters and nobody holds that individual accountable. So it almost seems like, I'm not going to say a conspiracy of sorts, but it's like everybody's this tight-knit group when it comes to gaining something, but when it comes to taking accountability, it's nothing. And I think the Ye situation, or the early Ye situation, really showed that, where it's like, I understand why everybody's mad, but I didn't see a single Jewish group who told Jewish executives, individual executives, hey, maybe tone it down on the pill popping music and the Black people killing each other music, because millions of people are dying in America, and Black and white and Jewish kids are dying from all this like terrible culture that you're putting out, and everybody's fat and everybody's on pills, like maybe tone it. I don't hear a single group saying that. So it feels like, I don't care if people are individuals, but this idea that Jewish people are only individuals and you're only an individual, it seems like everybody's only an individual when it comes time for some sort of self-awareness and self-accountability, but everybody is a cohesive unit when it comes to defending, what they would consider an attack or, something that's unfavorable.
I mean, two things can be true at once. You can be part of a family, a unit, and you can also be your individual. I'm sure you have
Right.
parents, brothers, sisters, kids, and so on, or a person can have those things. And just because a brother or sister committed a crime doesn't mean that the whole family should be condemned for what that person did, but it doesn't mean that they're also not one unit. So two things can be true at once. And I think this is a situation. The Jewish people are a family, our civilization, and we are right. You know what? I'm gonna say right now, tone it down against the pill popping music and killing of black people. All
Right.
right.
And,
So
and I don't
since
think it's
you
your.
say as individuals, right now represents the Jewish people, so we officially condemned it. So again, there are many. By the way, I've never taken a pill in my life. Not Advil, not Tylenol, not pain medicine, not nothing. I'm against all sort of pharmaceutical things that deal with symptoms and get us hooked on stuff. I'm more into natural remedies and to plants that were built by this universe in order to heal us rather than to inject ourselves with all sorts of toxins. So I don't think that music should promote that. And and anyone that is against it has a right to talk about it. I think it's very dangerous to group all Jewish people with that.
Right. And I know I don't think it's your responsibility to condemn that, but that's my as somebody that loves Jewish people and doesn't like racial tension, like it's not this doesn't help me out in America. Like when everybody's pissed at each other, it's not ideal. I would love like no crime, that's a utopia to me. But in general, I think that's my one take is like, when the group comes together only for good stuff, but then scatters for bad stuff and never holds each other accountable for things that are being done, that's when it becomes a little bit odd. But
I
I
think
do
the
know.
average Jew doesn't even know about the problems that music is doing and that they're mostly Jewish people in the industry. Like if you speak to the average Jew, they have no idea about who is like the majority in Hollywood and this and that. Like they don't even know.
Right.
So
And
you're right. You're right for saying like guys, like a large percentage of your population is holding positions of power in this industry that is doing wrong things. You can say, guys, wake up and condemn this. But then when you say, oh, because you're not condemning this and you're doing this, it means that you guys are a group. That's when it even those that would hear you would then just tune out. And I'm still hearing you because I know what you mean. And I'm just trying to mediate the
yeah,
conversation for us to get to the truth.
let me specify that. If you're the average Jewish person, you don't have to do anything. Just like I don't have to do the average black, like you're not responsible for anything. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to condemn anyone. The average Jewish person, honestly, don't do anything. Live your life and be yourself. What I'm speaking to directly is Jewish activists, Jewish groups that say we're Jewish. Like I'm not gonna just come up to someone and be like, Jew. I have friends. We hang out. Like it's not like Jew, white, Christian. I mean, honestly, my friends are not politically correct, so we'll make jokes and stuff. But I don't live my life like you're responsible for them. The point that I'm making, if you identify as we are the World Jewish Congress, or we are a Jewish organization, or I am a Jewish rights activist, then you are identifying as that group. But then when there's criticism of that group, all of a sudden there is no group. I'm not talking to the average Jewish person.
There's no problem with criticism.
They bear no brunt. It's more like, and I understand the sensitivity to certain topics, but that's just my take is like, even with the Kyrie, I think it's the perfect example and analogy is as someone like, I even got blamed. Somebody called me oh, I'm like, dude, I didn't even watch the film. I don't even know what's in it. But the point that I was making is when you get so upset at that and try to fight it, sometimes it turns into your own worst enemy, and then it gets like 100,000 times as big. If everybody just ignored Kyrie Irving, literally barely anyone would have ever saw that documentary or cared. But because such a scene was made, so I guess that's the point that I'm trying to get, because I like Jewish people, but I feel like those type of tactics of like getting so upset and then constantly identifying to shut stuff down, but then saying that they're not that, like with these organizations, not like random people that like run a deli. I'm talking about like organizations. That's the part that it almost just builds more, tension against them. And like the ADL's like, oh my gosh, it's, there's never been so much anti-Semitism. It's like, no offense, maybe you're not doing a good job. If your job's to stop it and it's rising, maybe you suck at your job. And maybe we need to talk about how to, better do that. And I think that's what we're doing here.
Yeah. So there's a lot of things that you said, and most part of what you just said, I do agree with. I think when someone is a Jewish rights activist or a Jewish organization, that doesn't mean that their issues is necessarily the same issues as you, where you find a few individuals in that issue to be Jewish, and that means that they will automatically know what that issue is just because there are Jews there. Do you have a right to go to those individuals like myself and to those organizations and say, hey, in Hollywood and in the music industry, there's a lot of negativity being pushed out, and a lot of people are Jews. As a Jew, I think that you should have a conversation with those Jewish communities and tell them, you guys are not acting like Jews and doing things that are right. Absolutely. But then it's a problem when you say it's like the Jewish people that dominate that, because most don't. And I think when you're a Jewish rights activist or when you're an organization, you're trying to help the struggles that Jewish people are we're all in our own like world, right? You're dealing with your problems, I'm dealing with my problems. So I'm in this battle right now trying to bring light to this issue, and I'm not even focused or aware that that exists. And if you want to come and tell me that that exists, like just tell me and I'll put attention over there. In terms of ignoring Kanye, I don't sorry, Kyrie, I don't think we should have ignored Kyrie, but I definitely think we shouldn't have reacted the way that people reacted. I don't think he should have been suspended from the NBA. I think we should have had an open conversation with him and to explain to him why those things were problematic in the documentary and how you can act in a better way to bring up certain truths. Like a lot of the slave trade came from Jewish tribes, not all, but a lot of them. And that's a fact. And you want to talk about that, that's fine. But then when you're going to say all the other Jews are these fake Jews and are Khazars and Japheth and Esau and all these horrible things of replacement theology that they're pushing, that's when it's pushing anti-Semitic things. But the reaction of the, let's say, Kyrie situation is not just Kyrie and the Jewish people. It's really a reaction of the generation that we're living in. Like people are intolerant to other people's ideas. We're not able to communicate anymore. I can guarantee most people who disagree with your ideas would come on and like bash you. Like there are points in this conversation that we disagreed on, but we're like super respectful and we both have the intention of getting to the bottom of it, and let's break down the truth and let's challenge it. And even at the end, then I'm going to disagree with you. I'm not going to tarnish your entire image and condemn you as a human being and cast you off just because you disagreed with me. So we've been raised in a generation in the world, unfortunately, where we're being pushed against each other and polarized, and we can't even have conversations anymore. And I don't think that's only particularly to the Kyrie and Jewish situation. I think that's the general situation happening in this world today.
I agree with that. I want to get into some American stuff because it's interesting. This is a lot less related to you personally or anything, because I know you're in Israel and you even said you don't vote, where there's this is the stuff that kind of gets me blacklisted from the Republican Party. Like, even though I'm a registered Republican personally, a lot of these people don't like me, the Shapiro types, etc. And I don't even have any hate about it. It's just such a taboo topic in America. I want to see what you think. So I've read on, because I actually subscribe to a few like Haaretz Jerusalem Post. They don't come to my door, but I just follow them on Twitter. And I saw that in Israel, I thought it was a very smart policy. And I don't know if it still exists, but this was from 2016 article, so I assume it does, where if you serve in the Knesset in Israel, you have to give up your Russian citizenship or your American citizenship. They want you basically, they want to make sure you're loyal to Israel. So I've read that they make, like, if you're a Russian Israeli or an American Israeli, once you serve government, they make you get rid of your green card or citizenship to fully serve Israel. And I read that and I was like, wow, it's a smart move. I mean, some people won't like it because they can't travel as easy and it sucks. But, I think that will breed loyalty to Israel. And I only compliment them on that. I'm like, that makes sense. I get why they would do it. In America, there's dozens, if not hundreds of people with dual citizenship in government. And it doesn't mean that everybody has bad intentions or everyone's wrong. But in Israel, they make you get rid of it in order to serve Israel. In America, they call you anti-Semitic, if you even, or xenophobic if it's a different country, to even suggest that should be a policy. I'm just curious what you think of that.
So I mean, I don't have a strong opinion on the government, telling people that they should reject their other citizenships, because I don't see citizenships as this is your nation and you're part of two nations or three nations, depending on the passport you have. I just see it as like a status that you have in society that either had like for me, I moved to America when I was 5. My entire life I was on visas and then green cards, and then eventually I got a passport. And I'm very happy to have lived in America, appreciate everything that it's given for me. I've paid my taxes, have respected the law, tried to bring light in whatever situation that I was, but I was always honest with everyone around me. I am not American. This is not my country. This is not my people. This is not my land. I respect that country. I respect that land. It's not my people. So I think the problem with dual loyalty is that when you're like saying one thing and then acting another way. and you're saying you're this, but in reality you're that. And that's why I think we should just be upfront and honest with who we are. In terms of passports, you go to certain countries like Singapore. If you want to get a Singaporean passport, you have to reject your other passport just by becoming a citizen, not even going into the thing. So different countries have different policies in terms of citizenships. But for me, a passport is a piece of paper. It's not what really makes someone one thing or another. It just gives them a status within a country. And sometimes that passport and status is taken away from them, even though they had it. So to me, I don't see a passport as well. I have a French passport. I was born in France. I have an Israeli passport. I have a US passport. They're all pieces of paper, and I'm not against any of those societies. And to all those societies, I will be straight up and honest. I am a Jew. I am a part of the nation of Israel, and I will never lie or pretend to be anything else.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, that's super honest. I don't know. I'm trying to find the thing. It was a printout from another live stream. It's a mess here. I didn't intend to bring it up, but I just thought of it. Like what you said was super raw and honest. And Singapore, I've heard they're hardcore about a lot of stuff, but like that's great. Like to me, I don't care who you like, what you do, even if you like your own people more. A lot of people would say that's racist or so. I don't care. It doesn't affect my day-to-day life. I can't tell you who you are. But in general, there's speech laws being passed into America. And I've gotten a lot of flack for disagreeing with these because there is actually, it's in 2016, I believe in Budapest, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. Their name is the ICRA. They came up with these terms. They're like 30 terms of what it means to be anti-Semitic. And there's all these sort of like speech rules where like you can't criticize Israel more than other democratic nations. You can't talk about media ownership, banking, stuff like that. But one of I've almost memorized it, but one of the laws specifically says in America, you're not allowed to accuse a Jew of being more or equally loyal to Israel or to the priorities of Jews worldwide. And now that's being passed through actually by Ron DeSantis, Donald Trump. They're starting to pass these speech laws into executive order on college campuses, into schools. And my issue with this is, one, I don't believe in speech legislation. I think it's a slippery slope to make speech illegal. But also, here's my thing. I don't think you should just run up to people. Like if somebody's Muslim, I don't think you should run up to them and be like, oh, you must like something else. Like that's not nice. You know what I'm saying? And like run up to a Jew and be like, oh, you must like Israel. That's not what I want, because I would assume that most Jews in America are American, so, and they don't all know about Israel or care about Israel. A lot of them never even been to Israel. So it's not fair to say that they are, but also there are also people in government and in media who absolutely do have, similar ideology of you where of course, why wouldn't they love Israel? I have no problem with it. Like, of course, like, why wouldn't you like that? That's epic. If you're Jewish, like Israel's an epic country. Let's be honest. Like, yeah, it's our homeland. It's pretty dope. But there's a law being passed in that says that you're not allowed to say any Jew in America has loyalty to Israel. And, Dennis Prager, Ben Shapiro, TPUSA, they all agree with these laws. And if I disagree with them, they call me an anti-Semite, or people assume that I just hate when it's the furthest thing from it.
I don't think it's that you can't criticize Israel the same as other democratic countries. I think it's you can't hold the double standard. So if you're going to criticize a subject, don't only criticize that subject when it comes to one specific country that happens to be the Jewish country. I don't think it's that you can't talk about media and banks. I think it's that you can't group all Jews as this is the Jews that are in media and banks. So I think that's what they probably mean. But if someone were to say that you can't have a conversation about Jews being in banks or you can't criticize Israel, bro, I don't know one Israeli that doesn't criticize Israel. I mean,
Right.
Do you know any society that has people in their society that doesn't criticize their own government? So you could absolutely criticize Israel. I criticize Israel all the time, but I criticize to uplift and to change and to be specific to address the issue, not to just create blanket statements and to polarize people into thinking that we're the worst thing in the world. In terms of Jews liking Israel, I don't think Jews can be pro-Israel because Jews are Israel. Right? I'm not pro Rudy. I am Rudy. It would be stupid to say that I'm pro myself. Obviously, I have the best interest for myself. The reason why we're called Jews is because we came from a land that was called Judea. So Judea became called the Jewish people, and Judaism became the portable suitcase of preserving that civilization and identity for that population. But before it was called Judea, it was called Israel, and after it was called Judea, it was called Israel again. So to be an Israelite, to be a Hebrew, to be a Jew, it's the same people. This is our homeland. This is not only our motherland and fatherland, it's our soulmate. It's where we come from. It's our indigenous civilization. And I believe every Jew is Israeli. You don't need to be born in Israel to be a part of this nation. You don't need to be speaking the language that, maybe your tongue was colonized due to displacement, where you don't speak your native tongue anymore. You can still be a part of that people. And I think every single Jew is Israeli. Not necessarily with an Israeli passport, not necessarily with an Israeli status, not necessarily grew up with like Bamba and Bisli and listening to Omer Adam and Shlomo Atzi and very pop cultural Israeli things that change with time. But they're part of a nation called the Nation of Israel, which is why every Jew can go to Israel and get citizenship right away and be a part of Israel within 1 second just because they're Jewish. It's not a religious state. It's an ancient civilization for which this is who you are. A Jew is the same thing as being an Israelite or an Israeli or a Hebrew. It's all one people with different names at different times. And I think a lot of Jews see themselves as, I'm Jewish, not Israeli. I'm Jewish, that's Israel over there. And I don't agree with them. And they can disagree with me too. It's okay to disagree. But I've had this conversation with several people. I could give a personal example. I had a conversation with someone who, like my family members, was born in Morocco, born in Algeria, moved to Morocco, then was kicked out of Morocco, and then lived in France for most of her life. And she identifies as being Jewish and French. And I'm like, but you're not really French. It's like, yeah, I'm French. I was like, well, first of all, you were born in Algeria, lived in Morocco, and then moved to France. And, at the end of the day, you're Jewish before anything else, because when you're going to give charity, if you have the option to give to a Jewish charity or to a non-Jewish charity, although in an ideal world, if you had money to give to all, I know as a good person, you'd give to all, you're going to give it to the Jewish charity first. Obviously, if you have kids one day, which I don't know if you do or you don't, obviously you're going to care about your kids first before your neighbor's kids. But that doesn't mean you can't also help your neighbor's kids. But it's absolutely okay to say we care about our own family before anything else, because that's our immediate responsibility. And then I told her, when you're going to the Olympics or watching Olympics and you're watching Team Israel play against Team France, you're supporting Team Israel. If you have to send your son to the army, you're going to send him to the army in Israel, not to the army in France. Other people in France see that, see you're saying that you're French, see you're acting like you're not French. And then this is where the dual loyalty thing comes to play, because they're like, you're lying to us. And I think we should be very honest. As Jews, we are not a religion. It's not an ideology. Many Jews don't believe in Torah and are still Jewish. So that already throws out the way that it's a religion. We are an ancient civilization, and we need to be proud and honest with who we are. And I think if we did, a lot less people would be against us.
I think if everybody was as honest as you about that and everyone felt that way, there would be a lot less tension for sure. I think that's raw, and I've honestly never heard anyone say that. I think that builds trust, and that's real. And I know that a lot of people disagree with you, and they will. But
that's fine.
This is the thing that I noticed,
and a lot of people agree too.
Right, so. For sure. Yeah, I'm not saying it's that unpopular. I'm just
but just for those who are listening, it's like it's not. Most Jewish people don't agree with that. It's like there are people, especially in Israel, most people would agree that every Jew is a part of this nation and this people. It's right. Jews that are in the diaspora in America, 60 to 80% don't even care enough to preserve it for their next generation to identify as Jewish. So if you're already working with that kind of statistic, it is normal that many people you engage would probably not even care or know anything about their Jewish heritage or identity.
Right. So one of the biggest, he recently passed away, so rest in peace, but one of the biggest, if not the biggest Republican donor in modern history, his name was Sheldon Adelson. Have you ever heard of him or no?
Yeah, I have.
Yeah, he's a big, was like a multi-billionaire. He gave hundreds of millions of dollars to Republicans, right? And there's this video of him saying actually exactly what you just said. He said, I served in the American military. He's like, but, unfortunately, I wish I would have served in the IDF, and my kids will serve in the IDF. And he's like, and they'll be snipers. And basically he was saying, I wish I would have served Israel, not America, where he's an American citizen. He's donating hundreds of millions of dollars to Trump, DeSantis, all these GOP people. And then these GOP people, who, by the way, are not Jewish. They're, Trump is Christian. I think DeSantis is Catholic. I don't know if he really is, but they're the ones passing these speech laws. So you have Sheldon Adelson on stage saying that basically he's more loyal to Israel, but then they're lobbying politicians to pass speech laws, which basically make it a hate speech offense to say that there are Jewish people in America who have more loyalty to Israel. And someone like Ben Shapiro actually tweeted that out, which is funny because, I I'm not going to say he is. I think he likes America, but I think he also likes Israel. I think it's pretty safe to say Ben Shapiro cares about Israel. Why wouldn't he? But he tweeted out, he said, if you ever assume that someone has dual loyalty, any Jewish person in America, you say that they have dual loyalty, that's anti-Semitism. That's what Ben Shapiro said.
Yeah, it's a problem. I don't think we have dual loyalty. I think we have single loyalty, and that loyalty is to Israel and the Jewish people. And that doesn't mean I'm against America, and that's my personal stance, and that's the stance of a lot of the Jewish people. Now, are some Jews thinking that they are also really French and really American and really this and really that?
Right.
Yeah, I would disagree with them, but that's what they believe. And in terms of lobbying, there's many things to criticize about lobbying groups and how that's done within society and how that influence what we call to be democracy, right? Which is really two bad options that just help corporations and don't really give the people the option to put people there that they care about. We all don't like the options given to us. Is that really what democracy is supposed to be? So yeah, there's many things to criticize about that, but again, I think we should just be honest as a Jewish community. And I've been talking about this from a young age. And I'll tell you kind of like why I've come to these conclusions. Like all of my grandparents were born in different countries, and all their families were killed and persecuted for being Jewish and not a part of those countries. And then I'm born in France, second generation. I leave France when I was 3 years old to Israel, then to Miami at 5. So I'm already growing up with all these different mix of identities. And even France, I left at 3 years old, but both my parents were first generation born there. So there's not this French identity. Plus, there was a lot of anti Semitism and still is in France to make Jews probably not come to the conclusion that they're French in the first place. And then I get to Miami, which I'm sure you've probably been to, and everyone's from somewhere else. You're this, you're that, you're this. And so in school, I'm being called the French kid because that's where I was born. So people automatically are assuming that I'm French. And then I go back to France to visit my cousins, and I'm the American cousin. And it's like, hold up, I should not be who I am based on who's asking me the question or where the question is being asked. I have to dig deep and find my own true answers and not be afraid of ever saying that out loud. And I've come to the conclusions after several anti-Semitic experiences that I had at a young age that I'm a Jew. And there's nothing wrong with that. If anything, there's beautiful things of being a Jew, and I should be proud of that, and I should help others come to that conclusion as well, even though due to our trauma, some of us have come to other conclusions.
I appreciate you saying that you have loyalty to Israel, because I think that that's bold and honest. And I think more of that, like you said, I think it would go a long way. I don't know if you know him personally or if you've seen him online, but like, Ben Shapiro literally will say that it's anti-Semitism to suggest that Jews in America have dual loyalty. Like, do you think he has more loyalty to Israel than America? He's just not saying it out loud.
I actually met him once for like 2 seconds at the Kotel, the Western Wall. There was a person that I knew that was with him, and he's like, "Oh, Rudy, meet him." We shook hands for 2 seconds, but I don't know him personally, so I can't speak on where Ben's positions are in terms of being more pro this or more pro that. He definitely is an observant Jew, understands that he's a Jew, loves his people, and loves Israel as his country of his people. The question of how much he sees that, where he's there, and that's for you to ask him. I can't speak on him. I'm not his friend. I don't have a personal relationship with him to be able to speak on him. But I'll speak on behalf of myself and my opinion. Which again, other Jews that can disagree, you can disagree, and other people that aren't Jews that disagree can disagree too. I think that Jews are a people, a civilization, and it's absolutely okay to be honest with where we are loyal to. And I think if we're not honest, that's when it causes people to question. Like if
Right.
you go, I went to university in the US. There were Chinese people there that were foreign exchange students. There were people from other countries that were foreign exchange students. There were immigrants that had just moved from other countries and had US citizenships. And if that person were to say, I want to support Bolivia in the Olympics, or I support China as a country and they're Chinese, I don't feel this like attack because you're being honest. The dual
Right.
loyalty thing comes only when you're doing something else than what you're saying. That's when dual loyalty becomes like, oh, those Jews are actually there. If we're honest about who we are, where we're from, and what we're loyal about, then no one has to question any loyalty. So let's
Right.
just be honest.
No, I respect you a lot more than Ben Shapiro for being honest, because, I'm not going to tell him who he is, but I see his actions and certain things he does. And I could tell that he prioritizes Israel over America, even just by like, oh, I'm free speech, facts don't care about your feelings. But then he always says certain things are anti Semitic, including things that he's doing, like basically saying it's anti Semitic to say that I might have loyalty to Israel. It's like, bro, of course you love Israel. Like, you talk about it all the time. Like, there's nothing wrong with that for who you are. But the part that builds untrust, I think, is the fact that he says it's crazy that anyone suggests that. Where I respect you more than him, because you're like, no, I do like this more. Where him, he would probably blacklist me from an event for even suggesting that he might have loyalty to Israel of
Yeah.
any extent.
It's not even about liking the country more. It's like, I don't like my parents more than other parents. They're my parents. It's my blood. It's my DNA. It's like who raised me. So it's not even about choosing. It's who I am. So we just need to be honest about it. So look, I think other Jews that were raised in other places and have certain triggers and traumas from past generations that it was a trope in Nazi Germany to say Jews have dual loyalty, so we need to go against them. And again, I think that stemmed from the reaction of a people who are very nationalist, let's say in Germany, and see that like Jews care about themselves before other communities, as anyone would of their family before others. It doesn't mean they don't care about others or that they hate others. And they see Jews saying that we're German and see them not really acting always as German. And then it causes this like whole confusion. So again, I understand why people are afraid of that because it's been used as a trope before. But to understand not the symptom, but the source of where this comes from in the beginning, it's from us not being clear and honest with who we are. And so I'm all about honesty. I'm all about being open. I'm all about dialogue and engaging and creating oneness in this world because we're all a part of one. And the only way that a body really is able to function is if all the organs knows that they're different and that it's okay and that we're all interconnected. And if one organ is affected, then the rest of the body is hurt as well. So we need to care about everyone, but we need to be okay with the differences that we have and honest about who we are.
Yeah, that was very raw, especially even saying that in Germany. Obviously, you're not excusing what happened, but just saying that when you have people that are not looking out for, say, the nation, people will get upset. And in America, there's a lot of double standards. I mean, we have black, we have white. So there's already kind of, like racial conversation going on. Then you add all these other groups where I guess my question is just like you feel that way, do white people have the right to feel that way? Do Americans have the right to feel that way? And I'm just asking your opinion. Do you think white people should identify as I'm white and act like a cohesive unit, or break down into like I'm German, I'm Italian? Or
Yeah, I don't like the whole race thing because it's like, why did we decide that skin pigmentation is what makes groups? Like there are many different types of white people, there are many different types of black people, there are many different types of many people. So I don't believe in the whole concept of like dividing people based on race. It's not a concept that I would support. But if someone wants to be loyal to their own civilization and their own people, I, more power to you. You should be. Why would you want to be a part of a people that you're not loyal to?
I guess my question is it racist or supremacist if white people do that? Like, at what point does it become? Because it seems like this is just my analysis of what we're living in. When black people do it, it's activism. When Jewish people do it, it's, just doing it. When white people do it, it's supremacy or racism or, like everybody, it seems like everybody wants to organize via their group except for white people, which you can only identify if you're like self-hating. Like you can't be like, I'm white and love myself, or else everybody calls you names. It's almost like you have to be a liberal and just like suck down soy milk and be like, I hate myself. And then everyone's like, oh, you're awesome, dude. So like, can white people love themselves, or is that like, are they the only group that can't?
Anyone and everyone should love themselves. If someone is looking in the mirror and they see someone that's white and they want to love the fact that they're white, that's great. The only problem is that when you think that that's better than someone and then start hating other people that are different, which is not what comes naturally just from loving yourself. So if that happens to you, whether you're white, whether you're black, whether you're whatever other color, looking whatever other way, you should always love what you see in the mirror. Unless you're a bad person, then you should correct that. And other people that you see, you should not reject them just because they look different than you.
Right. And I guess one more thing real quick, like with nations, like every nation thinks they're the best at stuff. I mean, until the Olympics happens and they lose everything, or the World Cup happens and they lose. But like, is it natural? Like, not obviously not to hate others, but whether you're Jewish or white or black, like obviously, in the society, it's like, oh, don't say that, Nick Cannon. Don't say that, Jewish guy. Don't say that, white guy. Like, don't. And I understand, because I don't think you should just like act like you're so much better. But at some point, is it somewhat natural for nations to be like, oh, I'm America, we're the best. I'm Brazil, we're the best. I'm Israel, like everyone kind of acts like they're the best just for like, tribalism's sake. Like but then like they lose and they're like, oh, maybe in 4 years we'll be better.
Well, I think again, there's a balance. There's healthy confidence. You know, if you're part of any sports team, like you should think you're the best in order to go and win. Like if you don't, then you already have a mentality that's not going to be competitive. But I think it's a problem when you start seeing other people as lesser or lower or inferior. I think that's the issue in terms of countries. Like you know who's the best? Earth is the best. So let's make it the best and let's achieve all of our potential because we all have different lights to create. We all have different abilities to go and do this and do that. And let's all do it as one and appreciate that we're also different.
Thank you for the conversation, brother. I appreciate it. And a lot of people in my country and in my political party or whatever, they've been dodging an honest conversation for years. And it would have been more about policy than what we talked about, if it was like a political thing. But they've been dodging me for years. So I appreciate you actually having this conversation, being open. And yeah, like that says a lot. So thank you.
For sure. Thank you for having me on. And I hope that you continue engaging with all different types of opinions in order to really get to the bottom of the truth. Because at the end of the day, like I said already several times, we're all a part of one. And the only way that we get there is by understanding that we all hold a certain piece of the collective holistic truth. And we should be bringing that together rather than weaponizing that against each other.
Man, God bless. Appreciate you, Rudy. And thanks everybody watching. And I'll put this on Spotify, Apple. It's going to be on Dream Rare Podcast, the audio. And then it's on Facebook, YouTube. It goes to Rumble after that. So, I'll send you the link, Rudy, and anybody else. You can go to my Telegram at Dream Rare Chat, and I'll have all of that stuff posted. Thanks for listening. Thanks for considering, everybody. And appreciate you guys. And by the way, for the people asking why we did it so late, he's in Israel. I'm in America. So the time zone is literally like almost 12 hours apart. So it's the only time we could do it. So that's why it was done at this time. All right.